Everybody, I'm Matt Williamson and I'm back with another video. Now, if you ever want to lose faith in humanity, just go to a Beatles Facebook page and start reading some of the comments, which like an idiot I did about a week or so ago. But there was one very interesting topic that was brought up that had to do with Beatles music as psychedelic and whose music in the Beatles was more psychedelic or less psychedelic. And somebody suggested that Paul's music during that psychedelic period was perhaps less psychedelic than George's or John's. And as you might imagine, the conversation on Facebook got a little bit out of hand. And we had one particular person here named Anton, and I'll remove his last name to protect him from himself. He said, "Oh God, more pointless bickering, this time about essentially indefinable music genres which exist only as reference for music journalists and deaf people." And then somebody responded, "So you're saying that descriptive words have no place when describing music?" So, you get these people like this that just don't want to really have the conversation. They want to come with their snark. And for those of you on dating apps, that means sassy banter is what that is. So he was challenged. He said, well, it sounds like people are trying to define what psychedelic music is so they can have this discussion. And Anton's response as well, which rather underlines the pointlessness of the term. Well, that got me thinking. I thought, well, maybe it's time for a refresher course to help people like Anton, who are either too lazy to try to come up with criteria of their own, or just don't know where to begin. Because this is it's not the easiest topic, but generally speaking, and I've had this topic on my channel before, so I've had many conversations in the comment sections and outside of that with regard to what is psychedelic and what is not. Extremely subjective topic, but there are ways to narrow it down so you can have the discussion. And what I've done is come up with some criteria. I did a video on this a couple years ago called What Makes a Song Psychedelic? And I just want to go over some of those criteria and then we'll apply that to some Beatles songs. So very quickly here, let me go over these. I had 8 different criteria. First one, lyrics. This is a pretty easy one. Drug-induced language, describing the effects of drugs, surrealistic imagery with the lyrics. Number 2, production. This would include backwards tapes, flanging, phasing, tape manipulation to get non-traditional sounds, sound effects that aren't normally used. Number 3, nonconformist themes, expansion of consciousness. Number 4, underground or counterculture subtext. What's interesting is the counterculture / drug culture / hippie movement / anti-war movement all kind of adopted this rock music as their own. So it oftentimes gets talked about as psychedelic music. I think part of that has to do with the live concert experience. So if you're under the influence at a live concert that's blues, well, that might be psychedelic to you. So I've got that in the criteria here, and I don't weight that one very high, and I'll explain that in a moment. Number 5, instrumentation. Fairly straightforward. That's creating sonic textures with distortion, drone, anti-pop sounds. You had the hijacking of Indian instrumentation in 60s music, like the sitar, tabla, tambura. These became tropes for psychedelic music, so that would be in there as well. Number 6, entrancement, extrasensory imagery. So this would be like otherworldly sounds, ethereal vocals, meditative states. One thing about meditation that came up through this Indian philosophy is that meditation was a way to get to higher states of consciousness. This got also kind of brought into the psychedelic realm. So where there's talk and music about meditation, that's also become somewhat synonymous with psychedelic drug experiences. Bit of a stretch for some of us, but that's just part of how people perceive it. So that's why I included that as a criteria. Number 7, the composer is under the influence. So we do know occasionally that some of the composers of this music were under the influence, and that's why it rendered itself maybe more drug influential or drug-like. And number 8 is 100% subjective, and that is the listener is under the influence. Okay, so we've got 8 there. We'll be using 7 of those to apply to these Beatles songs. So let's get started. What songs are we going to do here? All right, first of all, the topic was Paul's songs seem to be less psychedelic than George's or John's. I think we can get to the bottom of that by applying this criteria. So let's have a look at some of the songs that were mentioned in this thread. Before we start applying this criteria, each one of these criteria, it's weighted. So there's like a score for each one of these. So it goes from 0 to 3 in most cases. So 0 being, well, not psychedelic at all, 3 being highly psychedelic. So everyone goes from 0 to 3, except for nonconformist themes, expansion of consciousness, and underground or counterculture themes. Those go from 0 to 2. And finally, the composers under the influence, I have that either a 1 or a 0. Either you are or you aren't. Some cases we don't know. We'll put a 0 on that. And then you can put if you're under the influence, you could add a point to that if you like on your own. So let's get started here. We're going to start with some McCartney songs. And we're going to start with The Fool on the Hill. Now, The Fool on the Hill, I would say, lyrically, let's start at number 1, I would say there's some druggy type of lyrics there, questioning reality. Sees the sun going down and the eyes in his head, sees the world spinning around. We're going to give that on a scale of 1 to 3. I'm going to give that a 1. I don't think it's blatantly drug related, so we're going to give that a 1. The second criteria is production. Well, I guess we have a little bit of production technique in this song that sounds slightly dreamlike or echoey, or George Martin putting on some touches on that. It's from Magical Mystery Tour, so I think, 'tis the season, right? So we're going to give that a 1. Nonconformist themes, expansion of consciousness. I'm going to give that a 0. I don't really think that really the song displays either of those things. Ditto for underground or counterculture themes. The drug subculture, hippie, I'm going to give that a 0 as well. Instrumentation, scale of 1 to 3, I'm going to give that a 1. You've got the nice recorders in there. They're, I think, double tracked. You've got some bass harmonica, so it's a little bit different, but not too much. That's why I give it a 1. 6, entrancement, extrasensory imagery. Otherworldly sounds, ethereal vocals. I'm going to give that a 1. I think it's got a little bit of a dreamy aspect to it. And then finally is the composer under the influence while he was writing this song. I don't know, not heard that Paul McCartney was or any of the other Beatles, so that's a 0. So we have a total of 4 points on that one. Okay, if we're looking at the weightedness of this criteria, so the highest score you can have based on this criteria is 17. 0 to 5 would be mild, 6 to 11 would be moderately psychedelic, and 12 to 17 would be highly psychedelic. It's kind of like hot sauce, isn't it? Mild, medium, hot. Okay, let's move on to the next Paul McCartney tune. It's mainly Paul McCartney's song. That's Lovely Rita. So Lovely Rita is a song that I've been given some grief on, and people say that's not psychedelic. And I'll explain why here in a moment. The song, lyrically, it's just about a meter maid. There's really nothing in the lyric that suggests any kind of drug reference or any kind of metaphor for that. Let's go to the production techniques. So the production techniques, I would say, there's some heavy echo used in there, and I think that really adds to the overall production, the sound effects near the end of the song. So on a scale of 0 to 3, I'm going to give that a 2. Nonconformist themes, expansion of consciousness, 0. Underground counterculture themes, I would say 0. Number 5, instrumentation. I would say I'm going to give that a 1. You've got some, again, there's a heavy use of echo on the guitar. There's some interesting bass at the very end of the song, the coda. McCartney's doing this bloopy bass line as they fade out. I think I'm going to give that a 1. Number 6, entrancement. Yeah, that ending of the song where I think it's John Lennon doing the heavy breathing and they're using this heavy echo on the sound effects. I'm going to give that a 1. And then was the composer under the influence? I'm going to go with a 0 on that. So we're going to add these up. 2, 3, and 4. We're at 4 again. So again, this song would be considered a lightly psychedelic song. Let's go to Fixing a Hole. Now the lyrics of this song clearly show some kind of drug metaphor, with the fixing a hole being a heroin needle. I'm going to give that a 2. The production, I don't know, the production is pretty straightforward. Nothing too crazy production-wise. Nonconformist themes, yeah, the drug use, or the perception thereof, I would say yes. Same thing with the counterculture. We've got, I'm painting the room in a colorful way, and when my mind is wandering, there I will go. So this is a continuation of that psychedelic vibe that they're trying to create with lyrics. Instrumentation, I'll go with a 1 on this one, on a scale of 0 to 3. 1 because the guitar in that middle part I think is pretty interesting. I think it lends itself to some psychedelic discussion, but not a whole lot. That's why I give it a 1. And 6, entrancement. Yeah, I guess overall I would say that there is some entrancement, extrasensory imagery. You know, I'm fixing a hole where the rain gets in, stops my mind from wandering where it will go. That to me is a slightly entrancement. And I give it a 2. And was the composer under the influence? Well, we find out in McCartney's relatively recent book, Lyrics, that he was under the influence of LSD when the song was composed. It's not under the influence of heroin, but it's under the influence of LSD. So we're going to give him a 1 on that. So adding up the points on Fixing a Hole, we get a score of 8, which by this criteria is twice as psychedelic as the other 2 songs. So this would be a moderately psychedelic song. Okay, let's go over to some George Harrison songs. We're going to start with Taxman. Now, the reason I chose Taxman, some of you probably said, what? Taxman? Well, let's have a look here. So the song, lyrically, there's no drug enhancement or inducing lyrics at all. They're talking about paying taxes and bitching about that. Number 2, production. Well, it's pretty straightforward. 2 guitars, bass, drums, pretty much. We go to nonconformist themes, expansion of consciousness. I would say that there's some nonconformist themes in here, just the idea of taxation. I'm going to give that a 1 on a scale of 0 to 3. Underground counterculture, I say 0. Instrumentation, I'm going to give this a 1. Why? Because of the Paul's solo. I think that solo, which is trying to sound, it's a modal scale, it's trying to sound a little more Indian. So that to me brings it into the psychedelic realm, at least instrumentally. We give that a 1. Entrancement, I don't get any entrancement out of the song. And then finally was the composer under the influence, not that I'm aware of. That's also a 0. So Taxman I have at 2 out of 17. Very mildly psychedelic. So you can see how somebody might say, well, no, this isn't psychedelic at all. Somebody said, well, yeah, it is a little bit. 2, very little bit. You get the idea. Okay, we're going to go on to Blue Jay Way. Now, Blue Jay Way, very strange song. So lyrically, if you look at the lyrics, you know, he's waiting for somebody to come in Blue Jay Way. There's really nothing drug-like about the lyrics, so that I give a 0. Production, this I give a 3 out of 0 to 3. Now, the backward tapes, all the echo, just the manipulation is used to make this sound very ethereal, which it does. Nonconformist themes, expansion of consciousness, I would say no. Again, the song is just about waiting for somebody. Underground counterculture, I really don't get any themes in this song on that point. Number 5, instrumentation. Okay, this is where we have some very interesting stuff going on. That dreamy organ, that very strange cello. I believe there's some mellotron being used in here as well. Yeah, this drony background. I give that a 3. Ditto for entrancement. I think this is a 3. We get these odd sounds, the ethereal vocals. And was the composer under the influence? Don't know, so I'm giving that a 0. So we have a 9. That adds up to 9 for Blue Jay Way. So let's move on to another George song, It's All Too Much. All right, so lyrically speaking, I would say this is very psychedelic. I'm going to give that a 3. Lyrics like floating down a stream of time from life to life with me makes no difference where you are or where you'd like to be. So lots of that philosophical, heavier lyric in here. So I'm going to give that a 3. Production, I'm going to give that a 1. I think that it's made to sound somewhat psychedelic with the layering of some of the instrumentation, which you can't quite make out in some of the vocalizing. Nonconformist themes, yeah. Expansion of consciousness, yeah, I'm going to give that a 1. Underground counterculture themes, yeah, that's a 1. I mean, it's getting high. I guess that would be a 1. Instrumentation, I'm going to give that a 2. You've got the very heavy distorted guitar and some of the other kind of dreamy brass section and sound effects at the end. Entrancement, that fade out with the too much, I think that's kind of entrancing, as is some of the other parts of the song with the instrumentation and just the vocalizing. And is the composer under the influence? You know what? I have not heard that George was. But all of this I'm going to give that a 0. So all this adds up to 10. So that is obviously far more psychedelic than Taxman, for example. All right, let's move over to John Lennon. Now, John makes this easy for us. We're going to start with I'm the Walrus. So I'm the Walrus, lyrically speaking, now there's really no drug references that are direct in this song. However, I would say that the Lewis Carroll imagery is very trippy and very druggy, so I'm going to give that a 2. Production, well, we're going to max out at 3 here because the production of this song is just off the charts in terms of the effects used to create this wonderful world of Lewis Carroll. We'll go to number 3, nonconformist themes, expansion of consciousness. I'm going to give that a 2 for obvious reasons. Just the lyrics alone sound, they're nonsensical, but they make sense on a different level, I guess. Underground counterculture themes, I'm going to go with a 1 on that. I don't find a lot of that in here. Number 5, instrumentation. Well, this is a 3 for me because you've got this, I would say the string arrangement that George Martin comes up with is incredibly psychedelic. And the other instrumentation is subdued. You don't hear the rhythm guitar much. I love the echoey piano and that dreamy piano on the intro. So I would say we're going to max out the instrumentation at 3 on this one. Same thing for entrancement. I think this whole song, the extrasensory imagery is at very high levels. And is the composer under the influence? Yes, John Lennon composed at least the intro under the influence of acid, so that he gets a 1 for. So we are at a total of 15 on I Am the Walrus. So that would be considered based on the criteria here. And the weighted evidence is very high psychedelic experience in this song. So let's go to Tomorrow Never Knows, the classic from Revolver. So lyrically speaking, well, this is from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, so you can't, Surrender to the Void. So yeah, that would be for sure a 3. Production, definitely a 3. We have George Martin with all the tape loops and all the effects. It doesn't really get more psychedelic than that, I don't think. Number 3, nonconformist themes. Well, yeah, this idea of surrendering to the void, that's not very conformist. Number 4, underground. Yes, I would say this is all underground themes. I mean, the book, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, Leary's book, The Psychedelic Experience, was very much an underground book. So that we're maxing out at 2. Instrumentation, well, yeah, 3. And we've got Ringo's hypnotic drums. We got the backwards guitars. We got the sound effects. All kinds of great stuff going on in there. And entrancement, well, certainly, if you got all those things together, it's going to create some extrasensory imagery, otherworldly sounds. John Lennon wanted his voice to sound from the mountainside or something, and they darn near achieved that. And then finally was the composer under the influence. And I believe he was under the influence of acid while writing this. So Tomorrow Never Knows is a perfect score at 17. He maxed out every part of the weighted criteria. So that one is highly psychedelic. A couple points over I'm the Walrus, in fact. And then I'm going to throw a curveball in here. Let's look at Happiness is a Warm Gun. And this is from the White Album, of course. Now, the lyrics in this song are certainly drug-induced. We have the metaphor of shooting up. Well, I need a fix. That's literally the vernacular for getting a shot of heroin or a shot of something. The lyrics, I'm going to give a 3 to that one for drug-inducing language describing the effects of. Number 2, production, 1 to 3. I'm going to give that a 1. Just because I think that there is an attempt, it goes through these different movements, and I think that was brilliantly done and just adds to the, keeps you on your toes for sure. Number 3, nonconformist themes. Yeah, I would say that shooting up is a nonconformist theme. We're going to give that, max that out at 2. Underground counterculture, I'm going to give that a 1. Instrumentation, I'm going to give that a 1. Not overly psychedelic in terms of instrumentation, with the exception of, I think, that very distorted and kind of wobbly guitar that is played in there, which I think is very cool. We're in entrancement. I give that a 0. I don't think this is that entrancing of a song. It's a little more straight rock than anything. And then 7 was the composer under the influence. I don't know on that one. I gave it a 0 since I don't have any evidence of that. So that song tops out at 8 points total. So that equaled fixing a hole in terms of a score based on the criteria. All right, so that is my quick exercise on ranking Beatles psychedelic music using the criteria I've come up with. Now, obviously, there is still some subjectivity in here, because as I have the weighted parts of this, you know, sometimes I chose a 1, other people might choose 3, but let's say you had a consortium of 100 people that are into this kind of music and they can all agree on the criteria. And then if they agree on the weighted averages that they apply to the criteria, and then you take a survey, you're going to get some consensus, I guess. And you know, is it perfect? I would say no, but again, we're looking for some consensus, and I think this is one way to go about doing that, so long as everybody agrees on the criteria. So one more thing I'd like to bring up here, if you want to listen to the Beatles psychedelic stuff, I have a podcast, and I created this album that never was, which is called The Beatles Drug Songs, which is of course a parody on the Beatles love songs. I actually think this is the better compilation. I think it would sell very well, actually. And I've got a podcast that has this double album, and I actually have a third disc because the Beatles have so many great psychedelic songs. And one thing you're going to find is it's a mixture of songs that have, you know, very mild psychedelic overtones and very heavy. But when mixed together, they all work very well. So some people, when I did this compilation, got really hung up and said, well, that song's not psychedelic, and so on. But really, when you listen to them together, they work well together. And I think that's really what I wanted to talk about in another video I'll be doing. I'll be bringing a buddy of mine on, my buddy Paul Mays, who runs the Technicolor Web of Sound. And that's arguably the most comprehensive psychedelic web radio station out there. And he and I talk about this stuff all the time. So he's got just a wonderful mix of all kinds of psychedelic music from the 60s or the 60s era. And he's going to join me on the channel here within the next few weeks, I would say, to talk about some of the songs on his station and some really great obscure bands, all kinds of wonderful stuff. So I look forward to doing that. So if you have any additions to my criteria, please put them below. I can always bring that up in a future video. And again, this is just kind of a way to actually have the conversation about psychedelic music. And I know it's not the easiest, but I think this is a good starting point. So I hope that helps people out in their discussion about psychedelic music, of which we'll be speaking about more here on Pop Goes the 60s.